we've been looking at using your values, your values to represent local values and or light versus shadow. Okay, and we've been looking at the way that light falls across things to describe that, so that if everything has a local value and everything is affected by light, it's going to read clearly. Here's a couple backgrounds from Bambi, and I bring these in because this is an important kind of a lesson, something they did in this, and so I want to point out this was designed. These backgrounds were influenced by a watercolorist by the name of Tyrus Wong, and other influences. His is mostly credited to his watercolor style, where he did things that are very, very soft. But here's the gist of it. This is more about gradients, okay? And there was an idea here that these gradients would create depth, spatial depth. It's a fake depth, okay? It's not a real depth. It's just kind of a fake depth. So what I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and draw this, the one on the left here, okay? And I'll show you just what's going on. And this is it's a case of what's called counterchange. Now, counterchange is kind of like a faux depth, or faux light. Okay, so I have pretty much this and something like this. Okay, and counterchange is a case where if you have a local value, let's just say we got an 8-ball here, right? And it's overall black and white. Strong contrast like that, right? So that's our local value. And if a light hits it, we're going to have this. But we're also going to get this effect of light on it. Maybe even I'll just kind of go into this a little bit. So our shadow shape is going to be the dominant issue here, right? So this is what we're going to get if we have, let's see. This is the effect if we have both, okay? So we're going to have a local color and we're going to have the light and shadow pattern on that. Now, counterchange is a case where we might take something like this and just say, okay, I'm going to put a gradient on this, and I'm going to just put a gradient on here, okay? And I'm going to have, within this shape, I'm going light to dark. And on the outside, I'm going to have a harder edge, but I'm going to change the value outside too. So what I'm doing with my values, I'm pretty much warping space, okay? I'm just pushing one. It's a faux light. It's not real light. Now, maybe what I want to do over here is maybe this darkness goes like this into light. So it almost looks like this light feeds up into the dark, and the dark comes down to here. Now, maybe within that dark, maybe I have something that comes over like this, okay, like a leaf or a branch or something like that, okay? Now I've got dark over light. And I can make this gradient, kind of splay this gradient out and soften that edge. What I'm going to end up doing then is I'm going to take and I'm going to erase this out slightly. So now I get light over dark. So I'm alternating light over dark and dark over light. And I'm doing it in not the traditional way of no tan and chiaroscuro. What I'm doing is I'm just using gradients. It's called counterchange. So I can make light over dark, dark over light. And each object I mean, even a blade of grass, it could start light and get dark. And if this blade of grass was dark down here and went light up there, what it means is I would change the background to be dark. Light. Okay? So this change, just changing this up is going to, again, it's called counter change. Okay? And you'll probably see it a little bit more talked about in watercolor applications, because that's, people generalize and generally look at that as a watercolor technique. But it's not just a watercolor technique. It's an alternative to literal light and shadow, or the study of that. Because what you're doing is you're just manipulating space. Like in the Bambi image, you can see there's a darker value here. And they're manipulating space. You can probably see what I'm getting at here after I've kind of explained that. If you look at the tree's dark up here, and it gets light there. It goes into something a bit softer back here. And this is it's important to note, because if you're it's an alternative to the way you might put something down, or the way you might keep shapes reading, or so on. This area is pretty much light here. I'm going to allow a lightness here because I'm designing the shapes. And I can see that this is going a little bit darker back here behind the tree, and the tree gets a little darker here. Fine artists like Turner might be a good example of someone who uses some of this, that on the outset their work looks a little bit abstract, but then you get a clear read of light over dark and dark over light. So there's a sense of light, but it's not, it's not literal in our, in interpretation like we might think, or we might see if it was a real physical light. So, again, with this, what we're doing is we're going to put light over dark and dark over light. So I'm going to have things going into the light, into the dark. I'm going to make those a little bit lighter. We'll get a few of those things. Same thing here, where we get a little light into some of these dark areas, like this. And then the dark is going to, might follow it down into the light, something like that. Light over dark, dark over light. Okay, so in setting something up like this, you might think, well, why, they were trying to look for a different style for all these different films and try to make them look a little bit different. This approach was really interesting from the standpoint that, like I illustrated above, you could take a light shape and put it over this medium and it would always read. Well, in this case, if they were going to do this story about this little deer, like the growing up or coming to age of this little deer, they wanted to make him charming and cute, but they wanted to put him in this forest that would be filled with kind of a dappled light. Okay? Now, that could pose problems. If you're going to design a character, I'll just show you. So I've got a character, and let's just say I've got a character that this is my Phoebo Bambi rendition here. Okay, so here we go. Now, let's just say that I've got this little character, okay? And if I take this character, and he's just one value, and I move it across here, as I move it across, he's going to be dark over light here, and light over dark here, and dark over light, and light over dark. Now, when I balance that correctly, what's going to happen, it's going to feel like this little deer is going in and out of light and shadow. It's totally fabrication. It's faking your eye out. Okay? And the alternative would be to do this, animate the character, and then create shadows all over him. There were no shadows on these characters. There were contact shadows under the ground, so that if they were right here, they'd anchor to the ground. Other than that, they would move pretty much flat through the movie. And they only use shadows for really emotionally impactful moments. So it's really a case of faking your eye to make you believe something. And I think that's the thing that it can work all across genre. It doesn't have to be just animation. It's something that, you're creating your value, and you're controlling your values and your ranges of contrast in order to communicate these ideas, okay? So, you don't need to, we could adhere to one school or another school, but it's pretty much anything goes that, I look at it this way, that brings you clarity and expresses your point of view. So the more ways that you can look at breaking things down like this, the more expressive you can become. So these are just different ways of managing values and capturing mood. Okay? I could probably, what make it read a little bit more is if I increase the tonal contrast here. If I increase the tonal contrast here, you're going to see a little bit more. See this go down a little bit darker back here. You're going to see a little lighter or darker up here, and so on, okay? This manner of counterchange is different than understanding real form, okay? Where form might say, I've got a light source coming from this direction, and it's going to affect this cylinder in a certain way. I've got other light bouncing around, so maybe it's going to go from light into shadow. Maybe there's a reflected light from the ground bouncing up, so it's going to be a little darker there. This goes almost parallel to the light source, so it's almost in shadow, but it's not quite. And then there's going to be a cast shadow from this. Okay? And as this reflected light bounces around, it's going to fill this. The farther away it goes, it's going to fill it. It's going to get a little softer like that. So we can understand that light may work in a way like this. But when we're dealing with a counterchange, we're dealing with this situation. We're dealing with maybe this is our cylinder. And all we're saying is this is a dark gradient. This is a dark gradient. Now, over the course of an area, this might change. So the background is going to get lighter here. And this might get darker over here. And you may even just say that this gets darker on this edge and lighter here, only just to hold on to these edges. So what ends up happening is just this. I'll show you. If I have if I have an area where I don't have a line here, okay. If I don't see a line on here, what happens is, let me just do this too. I've just obliterated that edge, okay, with a gradient. That's it. Just with a gradient, I've obliterated this edge. So what ends up happening is this area here becomes a passage where it moves your eye. Okay? And this area, I put this in, this becomes a dark passage. Okay? So these are passages that move your eye around, through and around an image. So even if you're rendering something with form like this, you're creating passages. Okay? Those gradients will soften and move your eye from one area to another. And as we draw, we're going to be doing one form laying over another one, over another one, over another one. And so you're going to have what's in light, what's in shadow, going to create the shadow, then a cast edge, and then goes back into light, and then goes into a form shadow, and then drops down to a cast shadow, and then it goes on and on and on. And in this case, with counter change, you're deliberately creating passages wherever you want to make these passages. Now, a question came up here. Once I increase the contrast in this, it's a little bit easier to see. If I took this character and moved him across here, in an area like this, he might be, I'll just put him in here, he might read dark over light. But as I make this same value, he's going to disappear in the areas. Right? So he's going to be dark over light, and if I wanted to push this a little more, I could push this a little bit more, he could be light over dark. And then all I need to do, this is all painted into the environment, and then all I need to do is put a little drop shadow there, and I'm believing that it's in this dappled light. And that's the effect. Our mind will, we can manipulate how we think about these things. If I put the character over here, I'll put him the other way, and I put a shadow here. But then I make keep him this value, and I make him the background a little bit darker. See, now I'm starting to believe that he's in light over here. And it's pretty much the same value. Okay? So this is just a case of creating gradients and passages. And those are important in your designs. And to be aware of them, even if they're in images up here, This soft edge creates a passage. It makes your eye move into this area easily, right? As opposed to this. This is a border. This contrast creates an edge, right? When you have tonal contrast between two shapes, you get an edge, or it could be considered a line, or you get a separation in those masses. When you have a gradient, you create this passage. And your eye moves easily here, but it doesn't move into these. So this edge here, this becomes a stronger directional angle because you register this as a shape more. Okay, so that's why passages are kind of important along these lines too. If I wanted to make ease the tension in here just a little bit, I could create a little bit of a passage, make him a little bit light over dark here. Something like that. Maybe lighten the upper part up here just a little bit. Okay. So now I'm getting a little bit more articulation. I'm just adjusting a couple of values on there. Okay, I'll show you how a passage might work. Okay. Passage, let's just say you have something, a ball or something like this. If I do something like this, I'm basically creating an avenue for your eye to move into this space from here to here. Okay? If I have something like this, I'm creating this edge, and this remains hard here. So this is a hard edge, and this creates a passage. Your eye moves into here. Now, for rendering form, same thing happens. These soft edges create passages. If I'm going to draw a portrait, let's say, and let's just say I've got and I have a person, let's just say they have some hair like this, okay? All right? And what I'll do is I can give it a light direction. Let me say this way. If I have a light direction like this, then maybe what I'm going to get is I'm going to get a shadow here, which is going to be soft. It's going to be a harder edge here. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a passage here, making this soft as a big form. It's smaller in there. But the main thing that I'm going to look at is right in here. If I want to make this feel like it's really standing out in here, I'm going to put a harder edge. And if I don't want her hair to stand out as much, I'm going to have this in the background. I'm going to keep that soft. So I'm going to take this. And I'm going to say, okay, here's the background out here. Here's the face in here. And it really comes down to, where do I want to delineate my harder edges, or where do I want to see focus attention? And maybe it's going to be over in this area that I want to see a harder edge here. Okay? So I'll maintain a harder edge there. Maybe I want to see a harder edge here. And then in the middle, maybe where this turns up here, maybe this is going to go soft. Maybe I want this to be soft down here. You see, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this passage here so that this holds on to a little harder edge. And with something like this, if I want this to be where the main focus is, I'm going to start to soften this up. And I may even just soften this down here just a little bit. If there's something over here, maybe I'm going to move into shadow or move into a darker value or something like that over here. I'm overstating these things, but let's just say that I want to move your eye and soften this up, create a passage into here. I might pick up something just a little bit harder edge in there so it turns a little bit faster. Maybe make this a little subtle in here so it turns around. and then picks up again, turns around. And then I'm finding passages moving into here now. Maybe I want to just make this all kind of subtle because I want to keep your eye focused up in here. I'm going to create these soft passages. Will they exist? Yeah, they're there, and you'll see them if they're there. And you can, if the model's lit in this way, then you're going to see those things in there. But this is just really what's happening. Is subtle passages that are going to be moving your eye through this. Okay? And if I want to, if all of this is getting a little darker, but I don't want it to be as focused as up here, I can still get a little bit of a gradient in here. To hold on to some of this stuff. Okay? Get my little lines out of there. So your edges and creating these passages can help move your eye through this. It can soften up areas, okay? I want to say, okay, get a little bit harder edge up there. Maybe on there, on the outside. Does that make sense? And again, this is all just managing your values and some edges. And let's just say we transition softly into this too. So we're just playing with the edges now. We have a set of values, and now we just play with the edges. And these abstractly, what happens? This stays as a hard edge and a hard edge. And these allow your eye to move in and out of the form. So if we have a situation where we have like a, let's just say something like this, where we have an active side and a passive side, right? We have shapes. Okay? We have shapes that are going to work this way, but then we can also use our passages. We can have, at the top of this, we can start breaking this up a little bit. So maybe we have a contrast outside here. That accentuates this, but then we start to lose it, and then we go to the outside here. And now we're highlighting this area here. And if we want this to be the main focus, then maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this side and I'm going to lose this side because I want this to be my main focus. So if I put a tone over here, I'm no longer looking there. Okay? And same thing here. If I put, let's just say I put a gradient over here, I'm going to soften this a little bit. So even though this is a passive line, I've changed the edge. I've lost it completely down here, almost, kept a little bit up there. I've accentuated it up here, lost it completely in here, and then I found it down in here again. So it'll move your eye along the edge and into the form. When we draw some more, you'll see it really evolve. And a lot of people talk about it different ways. You can even take individual forms and go light, shadow, and you'll get it. But you can think of it in terms of passages as well, because the passages like this these are how you nuance those elements of form. This happens along with these shapes falling over these other shapes. We have something like this, and where this might be in shadow, and this is in shadow here, this is going to start falling into that, creating parts of this, and then this is going to be like that. Okay, so all in all, you're getting a similar situation. One's rolling into the other. But how you manage this now, if you say, okay, where do you want the viewer to look here? Do you want him to look here? Do you want him to look here? What are you accentuating? That's where you increase your contrast. You maintain your contrast. If you want to diminish something else, say, okay, I want him to look up here. Okay, well then maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little gradient here. I'm going to put a darker background up here to accentuate that. And I can do a couple things. I can either darken all of this down here, which I'll do a little bit of. Okay, it's a smaller form, reflects less light, so I might just make that a little bit darker like that. But what I could also do too is diminish the contrast here. And by maintaining the contrast up there, let's just increase this a little bit. I can tell the viewer where to look, what's more important. I build a hierarchy now. I can set up just by my passages and stuff and how I work with those values. Okay? So the forms are one thing. And how you accentuate these value groupings, those tell you also about light, but they can be manipulated a little bit so that you can tell the viewer where to look and how you want them to move through your image.